Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee of the 26th of April. This meeting is being live streamed and will be made available on the Council website for public viewing. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you are not addressing the meeting, writing speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you're in the hall, you can do this on your iPhone or iPad. Please do not repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you rejoin the meeting so we can keep track of whether the meeting is quorate. All members should speak clearly, taking their time and speaking directly into the microphone when making contributions. When referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. Tracy, can you confirm the sediment? And I approve the remote participation of members in this meeting today.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. We've got 19 members present in total, 8 present in the chambers here at English Street, being the Chair, the Vice Chair, Councillor Dashper, Councillor Davies, Councillor Drybrough, Councillor Howie, Councillor Slater and Councillor Thompson, and 11 present on the Teams platform being Councillor Beretti, Councillor Blake, Councillor Crothers, Councillor Dennerley, Councillor Drysdale, Councillor Hill, Councillor Hislop, Councillor Jordan, Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Marshall and Councillor Walters. Got one apology from Councillor Campbell, and we also have one vacancy on this committee. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Members, are there any declarations of interest? And can I remind you that to confirm whether you're making a statement of connection or a declaration of interest. It would appear there are none today. So we move on to agenda item number 3, the minute of the previous meeting of 29th of March 2023 for approval. Is this a true record, members? Oh, Councillor Beretti.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a second, I'll put my camera on. Yeah, can I draw your attention, Chair, to page 15? And even with only one eye, I am seeing double, because in the item of 8, where we have the motion and the amendment, somehow Councillor Hislop has managed to vote in both cases. And judging by David's face, he's probably trying to work out what it is. And I believe that it is Councillor Jordan who's missing from the motion.
Thanks very much, Tony. Is that all right, Tracy? With that amendment, members, are we content with the minute as set out in the papers? Thanks, members. That's approved. And thanks for bringing our attention to that, Tony. We move on now to the procedure for today. Can you just clarify the procedure for today, please, Tracy?
Thanks, Chair. The Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or the other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chairman has been provided with a list of eligible representatives who have registered to speak at this meeting within the period specified in Council policy. No other people will be allowed to speak. The Chairman will individually invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties being heard will be as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, Elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee, and such members should withdraw from the meeting after making their presentation, and applicants or their agents. Representatives were offered the option of attending today's meeting in person, joining remotely via Microsoft Teams, or to provide a written statement to be read out on their behalf. And a copy of the public speaking list is available from the committee officer taking notes of our proceedings and has been uploaded to the Microsoft Teams chat. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, except for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, where the time limit will be 5 minutes. The chairman of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you take too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council when deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all the representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members of the public may address the committee from the public gallery. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application.
Thanks very much, Tracy. We move on to agenda item number 4, members. An application for the siting of 6 glamping pods, formation of new access, parking area, access tracks, paths and turning area, installation of drainage and associated works at Caitloch Plantation, east of Terreran Bridge, Moneyhive. Its full application, reference number 21/2278/full. The recommendation is to refuse, and our case officer is Judith Turnbull. Judith, will you take us through your presentation, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The first slide is the location plan. The site's about 2 kilometres northwest of Moneyhive. It's just to the north of the unclassified U394, and the Dalwhit Water runs along the northern boundary of the site. Excuse me. The site lies within the Thornhill Uplands Regional Scenic Area, and parts of the site also lie within areas designated of being at risk of river and surface water flooding. Thanks. This is a proposed block plan. I've indicated on this slide the locations of the pods, which are mostly along the bank of the water course, with the exception of pod 5, which is set back in a more elevated location. The proposed car park is shown, which would be next to the public road, and that's in the highest part of the site. The pods would be accessed by foot only from the car park via a network of paths, and they're shown in grey on the plan. This is the proposed car park and visibility displays. It's a larger scale drawing of the car park showing the 8 individual parking spaces, one of which would have an electrical charging point. This is the proposed pod elevations and floor plan, which also includes an artist impression. The pods would have a footprint of about 6.3 metres by 4.5 metres and a height to ridge of just over 3 metres. The proposed finishes would be weather timber cladding to walls and roof, and each pod would have a wraparound L-shaped decking area. Excuse me. This is a view northwest over the southern corner of the site. This is the first part of the site that you would come across if you're approaching from Moneyhive, and the site's beyond the dike, beyond the gate. And it's looking over the area where the car park would be located, just to the right of the public road, behind the trees in the foreground. Plot 5 would be beyond the car park, about halfway down the slope towards the water course. This is the view towards the northeastern corner of the site, also taken from the public road. This is taken from a bit further down the road, looking back over the site, approximately over where the car park would be located. and down to the corner where plot 6 would be positioned. This is panning left from the previous slide, but back down towards the area where pods 2, 3 and 4 would be located. This is taken looking west along the side, along the water course, which is just, you can't really see it very well, but it's just in the trees to the right-hand side of that slide. And this is showing the approximate locations of pods 2 and 3. This is taken looking into the site where pod 1 would be located. And this is the final slide taken from across the valley, and I've tried to indicate the extent of the development on this slide. So to conclude, and as detailed in the report, the application is recommended for refusal for 2 reasons. Firstly, on flooding grounds, in that it's not been satisfactorily demonstrated that the proposed development would not lead to an unacceptable increased risk of flooding. And secondly, on landscape grounds, in that the overall development would not respect, protect, and or enhance the landscape and scenic qualities of the site and its vicinity, and is contrary to LDP2 policy OP1C on landscape. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Judith. Members, do we have questions for our case officer? Tony Beretti, was that a previous request on the minute? Or
No, I've been desperately trying to click the right buttons, Chair.
Okay, come away,
Yes,
Tony.
yeah, case officer, thank you very much. You've already mentioned that this area here had, or the Money Ive area had suffered extensive flooding in the early year of this year. How far up did the flooding go? Because I saw some of it and I was sent photographs of it, but I didn't see photographs of the entire stream area. And as you've already pointed out, there's 1 or 2 pods that are very, very close to the water line. I can also see from the images, and you'll be able to give me a little bit clarity on this, the ground conditions, they didn't look stable, they looked a bit boggy. Would that be an observation that would be accurate or inaccurate?
Well, I'll ask you just to reply, but before that, if you said you've seen photographs of that site, you'll need to remember that only information that all members have can be introduced here today. And I've not seen any photographs of that, and there's been none presented so far.
Yeah,
so.
I'll just specify, Chair. I've seen flooding around the Money Ive area in the town, but I haven't seen photographs of that particular stream. So fine. that was me being precise.
Thanks, Tony. Judith?
The flooding area is generally located to the banks of or round about the watercourse. And when I did my site visit, though, I didn't get wet feet because I would remember that. So, you know, and I walked down and along the watercourse, and I don't recall there being any issue with trying to keep my feet dry. I didn't have wellies on.
Okay, Tony.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tony. Councillor Slater, please.
Just looking at the photographs, it seems very, very steep, that land, down towards the watercourse. And as it's been mentioned before, it looks as if it would flood. That's really my question, really. But the land's very steep towards the river.
Judith, please.
The land is steep on the side of the road, but not steep on the other side. There's not the same, it's not in a valley per se, it's flatter agricultural land on the far side. The main issue with the flooding is really the objections from SEPA and the flood risk, and that the issues raised by them have not been satisfactorily addressed.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. And members will sure be aware we're not in session yet, but if members are inclined to approve this, it would have to go to Scottish ministers because of the objection from SEPA and our flood risk management team. Councillor Hazlitt, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just about the two reasons for refusal. Now, one is that the flooding hasn't been demonstrated. Now, that would suggest to me if it had been demonstrated and the proper methodology, been used, then that objection might have been lifted because it was the methodology of their flood statement that was concerning SEPA. And the second one, there's reference within your report to the fact that it could be screened and it wouldn't be of such a visual impact. I think it was in page 29, 4.7, the last paragraph. So are you saying the first one's a stronger reason for refusing it, or are you saying both reasons are of equal weighting when looking to refuse this application?
Judith? It may be that the both reasons, and whether or no one's stronger than others, a matter of conjecture. Judith?
Yeah, they are both considered appropriate reasons for refusal at this stage.
Right, thanks.
Thanks, Ivor. Any other questions for our case officer? In that case, members, we'll now go on to objectors. We have an objector, David Wilson, in person. If you'd like to come forward, please, David. The little button on the bottom right of that console, if you press it, a red light should come on and that'll get you linked to that's it, to the microphone. You'll have 3 minutes to make your presentation. I'll ask you with 30 seconds to go to draw your presentation to a conclusion. And if you've been kind enough to wait in case members have questions for you, I'd be grateful. So whenever you're ready, David, thank you.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I would like to just say a few things that I think are relevant and should be highlighted. Firstly, the list of objectors includes all residents in the Glen, 100% every household. Also, there's other objections from people living in the wider community who know how unsuitable the proposed site would be. The people living in the Glen feel very strongly that it would be wrong for this development to be imposed on the community that doesn't want it or need it. The main grounds for objection are the detrimental impact it would have on the landscape, both visual and environmental. Visually, the proposal is very out of character with the surroundings. The beauty of the Glen is its traditional unspoilt feature, and 6 proposed cabins, the 8-car car park, a turning area, bin store, associated infrastructure, it would all be highly visible as they are just off the roadside. The proposal can hardly be sold on environmental grounds either. Felling the trees to clear the site and laying tarmac at the entrance to the car park is hardly environmentally friendly, especially when compared to the plantation which was previously there, which was a haven for wildlife. The Glen Road is not a good road with a poor surface, soft verges and overgrown sides, meaning it can be difficult to see round corners. There's a fair amount of agricultural traffic and it's not easy for pedestrians to quickly get into the site to avoid oncoming traffic. The site floods regularly. This past winter it's flooded 4 times. I took photos on a couple of occasions and I note that these are on the Council's planning portal. Hopefully you will have viewed them as they are fairly conclusive. A number of the cabins would have been floating down the burn. Yes, you probably could put the cabins further up the slope, but it wouldn't alleviate the danger of being only a few metres away from the really strong floodwaters that rise and fall rapidly. It would be dangerous, especially since there is no one on site to warn or guide visitors in such an event. That ties in with my next point, which is the remote management. If you look at the other glamping offerings, local glamping offerings, the hosts are generally on hand to welcome guests and help with any problems or questions. The proposal to use messaging apps seems very impersonal, and the applicant may not be aware that the mobile phone coverage in the Glen is patchy and some networks don't get any reception at all. Also, there will be no one on site to resolve any issues or disputes, etc. For example, campfires and keeping dogs on leads. Finally, there is not a need for more tourist accommodation in Moniaith. The market research document is inaccurate, suggesting that there is currently a poor tourist accommodation offering. In fact, there is plenty of accommodation available. 2 hotels, numerous B&Bs and Airbnbs, guest houses, chalets, other nearby glamping pods and a caravan park only a few miles away. There is also a campsite provided in the village during the busiest festival weekends. The fact that it suggests a suitable outdoor activity for guests would be a hike from Stranraer to the Mull of Galloway
You have 30
shows
seconds to
just
go,
how
David.
much local knowledge went into the document. Having spoken to the owner of another glamping site, guests typically bring their own provisions with them, and a 2-mile walk to the pub would likely be off-putting, especially in poor weather. The suggestion that the village hairdressers would benefit seems unlikely too. The economic benefit to the village of Moneyhive would be minimal. A couple other points to note: in the summer, the Dalpot River has been known to run dry, which would be a problem for extracting the water, and in winter, the proposed site gets no sunlight due to being north-facing and in the shadow of Cateloch Hill, and can be frozen up for weeks on end. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, David. And I know you were trying to squeeze as much information into the 3 minutes as you could, but I had a note saying that can our speakers speak a little slowly, please, because we have one British Sign Language interpreter with us, and members need the opportunity to actually hear what the representatives are saying. But thanks for being so concise. Questions for the objector from members? There are none, is there? Oh, David Slater.
Yes, just a question. Trees that are going to be cut down and habitat. Is there many trees to be cut down? Sorry?
The site's already been felled.
Sorry.
Sorry, yeah, the site's already been felled previously. There was a felling licence. I don't know the exact dates, but it did stipulate that the site was to be replanted, but I don't know how enforceable that will be.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. We've got Councillor Barretti. Tony?
Sorry for the delay, Chair. One point that you've raised, and that is the mobile signal coverage. As far as you've pointed out, that there is going to be no human presence on site when people arrive. I don't know what the mobile coverage up is there, but have you an idea as to whether or not that might represent an issue if there is an event and people are not aware of it?
Well, I live and work in the Glen and have done for most of my life. Yeah, mobile phone reception is a problem. I work outside and there's plenty of areas on the farm that I work on that I can't get a reception. I guess if there was a true emergency, I don't think it's a single reception that's required. There's like an overall emergency signal that can be to be used. There won't be anyone actually on site though, so I would have thought it would be an issue just for general guidance and resolving any issues, etc.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tony. Are there any other questions for the objector? In that case, David, thanks very much for being here today and thanks for your presentation. We now have a representation from the applicant. It's a statement and Tracy will read that out for us. And again, limit to 3 minutes. I did note the message that Andy McFarlane put on regarding additional time, and the time was set for a particular purpose, and if folks speak at what you consider to be normal speech level, there's still enough information, I think, to be shared within the 3 minute window without adding on, because we could then get ourselves into an unlimited time period, and we look to folks to be concise and to compact their information into a reasonable time frame, but we can discuss that if need be at another juncture. It certainly won't happen today, but thanks to the members that mentioned that on the chat function. So to the representation from the applicant, Tracy, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, a statement to be read out from Alex Duncan, the applicant. The aim is to create a small off-grid development which will concentrate on providing a responsible, eco and sustainable tourism type facility, quite unlike anything else in the area, and attracting a whole new type of tourist for short and long stays on a self-catering basis. And the intention is to be carbon neutral whilst having a very light touch on the landscape. Importantly, this will bring increased revenue to local businesses via groceries, meals and entertainment, and thereby benefit the community as a whole. There will be no adverse impacts on the river, the quality of water or the surrounding land, and the land itself has no other real use or value, being too small for commercial forestry returns, and with heavy ground is also not suitable for agricultural use. So the cabins will be very rustic, timber-clad structures designed to blend into the landscape with minimal landscaping work envisaged, nor would the cabins be directly visible from either passing cars or neighbouring properties being located at the bottom of a tree-bordered valley. Heating will be primarily by wood-burning stoves using high energy sustainable wood fuel in the form of briquettes sourced from local suppliers. Local trades will be used for the construction of the cabins, and local people for management, maintenance and housekeeping duties, bringing additional benefits to the community. Foundations for the cabins will be minimal and require no heavy groundworks or machinery, and they will be raised off the ground on post and beam type foundations in order to mitigate any issues around flooding. Additionally, and an important point of note, is that the intention of the site to be closed during periods of extreme rainfall and subsequent raised high river levels, thereby removing any concerns over public safety. The dry type composting toilets are very environmentally friendly and sustainable, with all connected waste material sourced in the highest corner of the site, in the specialist composting bins, and for later reuse as fertiliser, in line with ecotourism best practices. The parking area will be kept minimalist and in the form of forestry type surface, metalled but covered in wood chip or bark to retain a very rustic feel suited to the surrounding landscape. The entrance and area immediately surrounding the car park will be more heavily planted out to further disguise the area, further reducing any visual impacts for the unclassified road.
30 seconds.
The rest of the site will remain naturally woodland, with a small area which has clear felled by the previous owner to be replanted and further enhanced with a range of native tree species, which will also be with native pine trees to provide winter cover. The replanting is already underway, with approximately 200 new larger specimen type trees now in place, comprising of beech, birch, willow, hardthorn and chestnut, with more varied varieties to follow.
Next time. Okay, members, so we've heard from the objector and we've had a statement read out from the applicant. So we're in session. Councillor Driver and Councillor Howie.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I look at 415 and page 31, where both SHEPA and the Council Flood Risk Management team were consulted and both raised objections and asked for further information and weren't given it, yet the developer can send us an email with information on it. I've read the report and I would go with the officer's recommendations in this report, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Driver. Councillor Howie.
Very much the same as Archie, Chair. We really have to respect the views of our own flood risk management team, and if they're going with objection now, I think we should support that, and I'll second Archie's motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hislop and then Councillor Barretti, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think the information that the officer gave us earlier on, that both or reasons for refusal are equally relevant, it gives me comfort that we should refuse this application. If the first one had more weight with regard to flooding and the methodology was wrong, that could be changed and we could maybe come back with the same application with proper methodology. But I think the reason for the landscape visual impact as well is sufficient, so I'd support Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks very much, Ivor. Councillor Barretti.
Thank you, Chair. No difference in opinion here. I think there are several points to this application, and I don't want to go over too many of them other than what have already been said, but just one interesting thing about the composting toilets. From what was said, that this area is in shadow in most of the winter, That to me would be a concern for composting, because composting toilets need a certain temperature, otherwise they don't work. And the other thing is that if it was said that there would be an alert to give people time to evacuate a site, then if you have poor coverage, signal coverage, how might that alert be guaranteed, Chair? But I agree with Councillor Dryburgh.
Thanks very much, Councillor Barretti. Are there any alternative views? In that case, it's a unanimous decision of this committee to refuse the application as set out by the officer, the case officer, Judith. And Judith, this is your last committee. Judith is taking retirement. Judith has been a wonderful servant to this council over many years, and she's been a delight to work with when she's been presenting to committee. I'm sure you all want me to wish her well in the future and in her retirement. I hope you have a long and happy retirement, Judith, and thank you very much for your service to this council.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Members, move on to agenda item number 5, an application for the erection of a general purpose agricultural building retrospective at Colraven Dairy, Borg, Kirkcudbright. Its full application, reference number 23/0347/full. The recommendation is to approve unconditionally, and the case officer is Tracy Carnegie. And I think David is presenting on behalf of Tracy. So, David, please.
Thank you, Chair. I should probably at the outset explain some of the background to this thing that you'll have seen in the report about a determination of prior approval, as certainly more recent members might not be aware of this. Basically, legislation grants quite extensive permitted development rights for agricultural purposes. So in other words, farmers are allowed to put up quite significant sheds without the need for a formal grant of planning permission. So that's up to 1,000 square metres, subject to certain circumstances. Now, what happened in this instance was the applicant did submit this determination of prior approval for the proposal. Now, basically what happens is that when it is a permitted development, one of the conditions of it being permitted is that the developer has to give the planning authority 28 days notice, and that's what this determination of prior approval is. Basically, if we don't get back within 28 days, they can just go and do it, and we can only really raise issues about siting design. Now, this was looked at when the application came in for the determination of prior approval, and the case officer was of the view that it was perhaps on the high side, but it was acceptable on the basis that 3 sides were going to be open. And unfortunately, what happened was it was built with certainly the side that was always going to be closed, but also 3 other elevations were partially or completely closed, which did change the character of it such that an application was required to basically resolve that issue. So that's really what's before yourselves, is the application for the change in the design and appearance of it. But it is quite clear that there was a permitted development on that site, the same footprint, the same height of the building. It's just the external elevations which have actually changed. So if we can just run through the slides, then the first one is your location plan. Just you can see the red line where just above the word site, and that's where it is. So you can see it's within a complex of agricultural buildings anyway. And the next one zooms in a little closer. So again, you can see it's not in total isolation, it's set against existing buildings. And the next one shows the floor plan, the footprint of the building, which, as I say, is pretty much identical to the one which we originally saw. The next one shows the elevations. Now, the top elevation there shows the one which faces towards the road on the southwest, and that was always going to look like that. The one below that is the one that faces into the farmyard that was going to be open, and as you can see it's partially enclosed now with the weatherboarding coming down so far from the eaves level. And then the side elevations, one is completely enclosed and the other one is partially enclosed. So that's basically the change that you're looking at today. Next one is you've got a number of existing roof lights which were on the northeast elevation. And there is also a separate application which is for some PV panels which have been put on the roof. That's only recently been made valid. That will be considered separately. Really what we're looking at today is the change to the determination of prior approval decision, not that. Moving on to some photos. That just shows the building in its context. So the one that's in shadow is the elevation that has now been filled in that wasn't going to be. And the next slide shows the get it right, the southwest elevation, which was always going to look like that. Again, you can see the PV cells on the roof, which is not part of the consideration today. Next slide shows perhaps the most changed elevation, where you can see the gable end there, the southeast elevation. That was going to be open from the sort of eaves level down, but that does give a little bit of a change to the visual impact on it. You are admittedly seeing it at its worst because the Yorkshire boarding is very new. Normally these things weather over time, and after a couple of years they adopt a sort of dull greyish brown colour. So you are seeing it at its worst visual impact. And the next slide, I think, probably is the most dominant location that you can see, that southeast elevation with the gable. It is, you'll note, set against the trees, and also you've got other agricultural buildings to the rear. So it is set in that context. And the last one is a more distant view. Again, it's probably standing out in the landscape more at the moment just because of the very new nature of the Yorkshire boarding. So the reason it is before yourselves is because there was an objection from the Community Council to it, Community Council being a statutory consultee, but otherwise this application would normally have been just dealt with under delegated powers because we get very many applications in for these determinations of prior approval a year, and as I say, there's quite extensive permitted development rights to farms to actually build buildings like this. Nothing really further to add, but happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thanks very much, David. So we have questions for our case officer, Councillor Driver, then Councillor Howie.
David, yeah, you're right about the DPA side of things. I was a bit concerned why this was coming to planning application, because normally if it's prefabricated buildings, the DPA would just go through as is, regardless how many sides and things like that, because we have seen some up, certainly in the S Valley and places like that where they're quite large, but they've got 4 sides to them and maybe just a sling door. So it was just to understand again why this would come as a planning application. Is it because it's got brick or breeze block siding as opposed to fabricated?
David?
Well, basically, the determination of prior approval application was considered on its merits. Now, what was built was not in accordance with what we had seen, so therefore the only mechanism, if you go and, for example, if you put an entire shed up on a farm and hadn't undertaken a determination of prior approval, then you've breached that condition of it being permitted development, so you need to submit a retrospective planning application. So here it's a little bit unusual case. I can't think I've seen many like this. It's normally the case we'd be pursuing one where a building had been put up with no determination of prior approval being submitted at all. Here that was the case, it's just that it's a materially different external appearance, and it's very clear in the report for the DPA that the case officer at that time felt it was visually acceptable because of the fact that whilst it was still quite large, it was going to be open on 3 sides, therefore reducing its visual impact. So it's really just to regularise the situation of the fact that what was built didn't actually accord with what we'd said we had no objections to.
It's also worth noting that a community council objected, and we would normally take that as a trigger to bring it to committee. And I think it's also worth bearing in mind that if you refuse this application, the building will still stand. It's only the added on parts that will be removed. Is that right, David?
That's right. I mean, basically the most that could be done is you wouldn't be removing the building. It would, if members felt the visual impact was so great that it was now no longer acceptable, then really all you could do would be to require the removal of the two gables and the boarding along the elevation that faces into the yard, which actually there is no public viewpoint of. So as I showed on the slides, I think the critical one is really the southeast elevation. That's the one that faces to the road that would have been open that isn't now.
Thanks for that, David. Ian Howie, please.
David, I just want, is there an animal welfare aspect to these alterations coming forward? It seems like a more expensive option, so it's been chosen. Do we know if there's any animal welfare background to this?
David?
Chair, I don't actually know why this was done, but you do have the applicant here today, so I'm sure they can explain the background to why they needed that change.
Thanks, Ian. We'll get the applicant to respond to that particular question. I've got Councillor Haslett, then Councillor Carruthers. Ivor, please.
Process issue, David. If I was a farmer, or in my former days I was, and I put in a DPA, put up a shed, and 2 years down the line I then put up cladding on it, do I need to apply for retrospective planning or planning for changing the cladding? You know, or putting cladding on? Because there's numerous farms, I would think, across the area where it might have been built as a pole barn in the old days, and then because of weather and that, they've put a side on it, clad it to stop water getting into it. So is there a time limit on when you can actually change the building or not?
David?
There are obviously permitted development rights under Class 18 of the General Permitted Development Order, which allow farmers to do things. I think in this instance it was simply the fact that it was so recent after one thing had been cleared and what was built was something different. But yes, you're right. I think you could reasonably make an argument that you could make alterations to agricultural buildings after time, and indeed after 2 years it resets and you can put another 1,000 square metre building up through the DPA process.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Ivor. Councillor Carruthers, please.
Thank you, Chair. David, that was a good explanation, because I was a wee bit confused as well when I first did this in regards to how it was here in the first place. It's out with on it in. It feels a bit like matters specified in conditions. Would that be a fair description?
Ian, can you try again, please, and speak a bit closer to the microphone? David and I are both unsure what it was you were saying.
That's okay, Chair. I'm in bad signal. I'll pick up on it offline. It's just a matter of clarity. I'll pick up. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. I'm sorry about that. Councillor Stephen Thompson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was actually interested in just to ask David at this part of the meeting. It talks about the amenity, because we've seen from the pictures there's quite a significant dominant visual impact depending on which direction you're looking at the building from. So in some directions there'll be some shielding from the trees, etc. But the pictures we saw there, it was clearly the dominant feature in the whole of the landscape panorama. However, in the report, I think it's 4.6 or 4.7, it talks about, well, actually, it doesn't really matter because the person who owns the land isn't bothered by that. But I think I'm just sort of wondering, in terms of planning, does it matter then in a regional scenic area or a coastal scenic area, actually, even though the impact of the visual dominance of a building might be quite significant in a regional scenic area as designated, are we then saying, but it doesn't matter if you own the land? It was just to get a sense of how much weight to give that. Thank you.
David?
Sorry, could you give me that paragraph again that you were quoting from?
Yeah, so I think you've got page 39 and page 40. 4.7, I think it is, it goes into, let me see. It talks about the elevation of the building, and I think at one point it says, well, actually, because from certain views, it doesn't, it's the landowner, so it's not really an issue, because it wouldn't be public, it wouldn't be other houses that are protected, if you like, from that impact.
Chair, if I'm right, it might be worth if we can maybe go back to the slides just to actually show that. Because I think the point that they were making is, if you can go back one further, please. Yeah. That main elevation that you're seeing there, that was always going to look like that. The gable was going to be partially open, well, it's going to be open from eaves level down on the original approval. On the other side of that, which, if I'm right, is the northeast elevation, that is facing solely into the farmyard, and therefore there's no real public views of that. The key elevations are when you're looking at the one on the southwest and the southeast. So I think that's the point that we're making. It's really that there's very, very limited public visual impact on that elevation having now been partially filled in.
So, an apology, thanks for that, David. I think I've made a mistake. It was 4.8, actually, where it talks about all three dwellings that would otherwise be impacted potentially are within the ownership of the applicant. However, I think if we're I think the question more for you, I think, in terms of the report was, if we're designating areas as special areas of consideration, on the one hand, they either are that designation and so should be protected or conserved as such, or if we're saying, yeah, but actually if you own the land, it doesn't matter because it's not public. At this point, I mean, who knows who the land will belong to in future, but presumably the designation of that area will remain the same, but the ownership might change. So it was just really how to balance those against each other. Thank you.
David?
Probably to give clarification, what 4.8 is talking about is residential amenity in terms of the agricultural shed going there and the effect that it might have through noise, activity, the usual things that you get with an agricultural building. Would they be affecting nearby dwellings? And I think what the case officer is saying, that the nearby dwellings are all within the ownership of the farm unit, and therefore they're not protected dwellings as defined in the legislation. In terms of the regional scenic area, the visual amenity of it, then yes, there's always a balance to be struck between making sure that you're allowing development which will assist the agricultural industry, and again, which have permitted development rights as well, and making sure that you're protecting the character of the regional scenic area. And certainly with the original determination of prior approval, the case officer was of the view that whilst I think she used the word on balance because of the height of it, the openness was such that there was no great impact. This has obviously taken it one stage further, and it's just whether or not members are of the mind that this is now no longer acceptable.
No, thank you. That's helped my understanding a bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. David Slater, please.
Yes, page 40, item 4.8. It says that there will be no increase in noise or odour given existent on the site. But I would assume this building is to house more animals or more cattle, so that could possibly increase the odour because there'd be more effluent from the animals. So that's really my question.
David?
It is obviously still within an agricultural unit, so similar. There's no change of use of the land, so it maybe perhaps intensifies it by focusing it into one particular area. But again, I'm afraid the applicant will be able to clarify what the actual use of the building is. I don't have that information.
Thanks, David. So, any other questions for our case officer? In that case, we'll move on to our registered speakers. The first speaker is Howard Davidson, who is an objector on behalf of Board Community Council appearing in person. Howard, if you'd like to come forward, please. He's an objector, aye. Oh, you're objecting in person and then? So you get two? My apologies, Howard. So your first objection is your personal one, 3 minutes for that, and then a further 3 minutes for the Board Community Council objection. Yeah, aye. Well, do your personal one first in case members have questions for you. And then we'll do the Borg one, and members might have other questions for you. And the same request, please, just a little slower than we would normally do on the basis of a British Sign Language interpreter. And I'll remind you 30 seconds to go to draw your presentation to a conclusion on your own personal one.
My name is Sid or Howard Davison. I'm objecting now in an individual capacity, and later I'll speak on behalf of the Community Council. I set out grounds in my personal submission of 20th of March, which highlights the links between today's application and other developments on the land that is under the same ownership. In considering the case officer's report, I would draw your attention to 3 points which appear to me to be material considerations given my long experience of dealing with the development of land in my role as a chartered surveyor. The first needs to sort out the form from the substance. There is evidence that you are only being presented with part of a bigger picture and that a single integrated proposal has been split into smaller elements and submitted in a piecemeal fashion in order to secure planning consent when none would be given. Were you able to consider the proposal as a whole? Consider the facts relating to the planning matters as set out in paragraph 1.5, page 36 of the case officer's own report. In February 22, the public were formally notified about the applicant's proposal to construct a large solar farm at Culraven. In June, he submitted a prior notification for a new building. And in August, he applied for permission to form a new access from the main road to serve the Culraven site. Meanwhile, in July 22, he began to implement a large woodland creation project involving part of the land at Culraven. The evidence shows that by splitting the proposals into different parts, the applicant could achieve 3 outcomes. The first is that the southern access route from the B727 into the solar farm could, in my opinion incorrectly, be excluded from the environmental impact assessment. The second is that the fees payable to the planning authority for the solar farm proposal are significantly reduced. And the third is the hope that the authority fails to recognise what is happening and proceed to deal with this matter in isolation, as is clearly evidenced by what is happening today. Common sense would surely tell you something is amiss. The solar farm would take most of the agricultural land out of agricultural use, yet the applicant has built what he described as a general purpose agricultural building.
You have 30 seconds to go.
A building whose sides were to be open so we could see what was happening, but they are now closed from public view. The building may have a temporary use for now, but we need to ask what is its true intended purpose within the broader context. The answer would certainly be a purpose that is not within the terms of the general permitted development legislation on which the applicant has relied. The case officer has also misdirected you. She says at paragraph 1.6, page 36, that the site is located within the local biosphere and regional scenic area, and that there are no planning constraints affecting the application site that are relevant. She then says at paragraph 2.1, page 37, that the other developments are not material considerations in the assessment of the current application and therefore cannot be taken into account. I would urge you not to accept her assessment of the relevant
presentation to a conclusion, Howard, please?
Constraints and suggest she has no lawful authority for asserting that the other developments are not material in the current context.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do any questions for Howard on his personal objection? If there are none, okay. Now, you're going to make an objection on behalf of Board Community Council, and it's the same 3 minutes, Howard, and I will remind you with 30 seconds to go to draw your presentation to a conclusion. And again, if you would just wait in case member have questions for you. Thank you. And I realise 3 minutes is not a long time, but that's the arrangement we introduced many years ago, and everyone is given the same limited period of time to present to committee. So again, when you're ready, sir.
Hello again. As Chairman of the Community Council, I appear to you today to ask you to consider the contents of our submission of the 11th of April and invite you to refuse retrospective planning permission to construct the building on the land at Culraven. I would ask you to consider two proposals to deal with the present application. The first is to refuse it for the reasons set out in the Community Council submission, including the strong negative impact of the structure on the landscape of the Borg Peninsula and along stretches of the B727, which is one of our key scenic roads that runs past the major Brighouse Bay and Seaward Park tourist facilities. In particular, I would draw your attention to the fact that the applicant's prior notification, reference 221120 DPA, was only accepted by the previous case officer because the structure was, to quote her, on the higher side of standard sheds, but, again to quote, considered acceptable in this instance as three sides would be open and as such the impact reduced in a regional scenic area. Instead of an open structure, the applicant has closed all three sides of the building, contrary to the facts stated in the prior application, and has more recently put solar panels on the roof without the appropriate permissions. The Community Council would consider at the very least the current case officer should have supported her colleague's earlier decision, which sought to minimise the adverse impact upon the building that the building has on the character of existing landscape. My second proposal would be ask you to postpone making a decision to allow you to arrange a site visit. As you've seen from photograph 4, it's one of the largest in the Stewartry, but the photograph doesn't show how elevated the site sits to the road. I believe a site visit would be essential to allow you to understand why the Community Council has disagreed with the opinion the current case officer has formed. I believe you could frame at least two motions of which to vote today. The first would be to refuse the application now, as you have ample grounds for doing so, not least because of the significant adverse impact of the structure on such a scenic landscape. The second motion would be to postpone dealing with the application and to organise a site visit to allow you to see how the Culraven structure fits into the wider landscape. That may be the most sensible course of action, particularly if you are minded to combine your visit with inspecting the land at Culraven that is subject to a number of open applications, including for the solar farm, the road access that are referred to in paragraph 15, page 36 of the case officer's report and in the Community Council's submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for Howard as the representative of the Board Community Council?
Yeah.
Councillor Dennerley, please.
Hello and good morning, Chair, and to everybody else in the Planning Committee. Thank you for your presentation, and I respect the concerns from the Community Council regarding the impact on the environment, at least the visual impact. And so I certainly would be in support of the proposal of delaying this so there's an opportunity to review the information in more detail and have further discussion to understand the concerns of the Community Council. So my proposal would be that we definitely defer this matter.
Thank you. John, we are still at questions for the objector at this stage. That proposal would come later in the process when we are in session. We have still to hear from the applicant and other questions may be put to the objector at the moment. So if you're content.
Thank you, Chair, for clarifying that. I understand. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. We'll hear from you later on in the process. So I have Councillor Pauline Drysdale. Pauline, please, question for the objector.
Good morning, committee. No, I'm okay. I'm going to wait for later. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barretti, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Listening to both the wording that we just seen or heard, I'd like to ask the objector, is he hinting from what he has said that he believes that the building may not actually be intended ultimately for farming applications with animals?
It may presently have a agricultural use, but from the design and the fact that most of the farmland has been taken out of farming use under the solar farm application, and in the medium term, I would say it's not agricultural, so therefore does not fit the criteria of agricultural use.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tony. Any other questions? David?
Just one for the objector. You feel that this building could be used for battery storage at the end of the day instead of agricultural use? Thank you.
David, we're asking questions on the basis that it's an application for a farm building. Know what it might be in later life. Any change of use would have to come back to the planning officers and back to the council. It is only there as a farm building or for farming purposes at the moment. Any other questions? Ivor, please.
Thank you. It's most to do with the fact that if this hadn't been in front of us today, we would have had a shed with 2 open gables and a side that was covered in, and that gable end could be filled with straw bales, which are yellow and would stand out in the area. Is it the shed or is it the actual cladding that is of concern to you as an objector and to the Community Council?
Because it's in the scenic area, I would defer to the previous case officer's view on the matter that the building was considered higher than would ordinarily be expected, and only solely because it was in a regional scenic area. Her advice was to keep it open on 3 sides, which has not happened. So the options are to presumably ask for the building to have the cladding removed, or alternatively reduce the height and keep the cladding on if that's the issue. It's just such a large building.
Yes, but if you were to remove the cladding and say we stored fertiliser bags or straw in there, you would still have the same effect of this large open-sided building with a big, say, white fertiliser bags. It would make it look even worse than the boards would be in maybe 2 or 3 years' time as they fade. So the shed is deemed acceptable. Would the boards in 2 or 3 years' time not be acceptable?
I think the purpose of today's meeting is to treat the application on its merits, not to talk about whether a fertiliser bag is going to be stored with it in 5 weeks or 5 years' time. So I'm just talking about the aesthetics of the building as it's built. I would like to show support for the previous planning officer who dealt with it, whose decisions seem to have been just disregarded by the current case officer, which makes it difficult to understand how the decision has been reached. I can understand it's more expedient just to say it's been done, but the unfortunate thing is that it's been done incorrectly. It's not the first time that at this location there's been a retrospective planning consent, and there's yet another one in the pipeline as well for the solar panels that have been erected. But as I say, my point is there was a reason for the case officer's original decision. That hasn't been explained, not acceptable. Photograph 4 that you saw shows the impact on a regional scenic area, and I'd ask you to please focus on that.
Yeah, I think we've exhausted this discussion. And just to be clear, I'm sure Ivor's aware of this, we're not here to discuss the location, the size or scale of the building. That was approved and that was carried out under approval by this council. The only retrospective applications for the boarding and 3 sides, and that's the most we can do if we choose to do it, is have these boards removed. The building cannot be removed. It's put there with the authority of this council. We're not here to visit that today. So if there are no other questions for the objector, thank you, sir, for being here today, and thanks for both of your presentations and the responses you've made. We now come to Mr. Wolf, who's representing the agent, Mr. Alistair Gowan. Mr. Wolf's also here in person. If you'd like to come forward, please. And the exact same arrangement will apply. You will have 3 minutes to make your representation. I will remind you 30 seconds to go to bring a presentation to a conclusion. And I know that both Councillor Howie and Councillor, I've forgotten his name now, David Slater has a question for you, but that'll be after. You don't need to address that in your presentation. So just whenever you're ready, sir, 3 minutes, and I'll remind you 30 seconds to go, and then if you're kind enough to wait. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Tom Wolf. I'm a chartered town planner. I've been over 30 years as a professional planner, and I'm here representing Mr. Robert Maitland, who is a farmer, has farmed in the Coleraven area for over 35 years. And this case is unusual, as Mr. Sutty suggests, because really the planning issue before you today is one in which, had the proposal as it is before you today come before the council as a prior notification for permitted development, I have no doubt that it would have been given consent in the same way that the approved proposal was consented, and therefore the issue really before you is whether the significance of the difference between one permitted scheme and another permissible scheme is so significant that it warrants refusal. So it's quite a simple question, really, and the answer to that is no, because, and that is really what the planning officer's report states. There's no significant difference between the two, and had it come forward in the way that the original one did, it would have been consented. I just wanted to turn to an issue that one of the councillors raised, perhaps in error earlier, about, and the objector raised about deferring the decision because to understand what the community council meant. My concern is that the community council objection was submitted on the 11th of April, 6:18 in the evening. At 7 o'clock in the evening, on the 11th of April, the same evening, the community council met to discuss, amongst other things, this very proposal. But it was not mentioned. The chairman did not mention that he had already made an objection on behalf of the community council.
We have 30 seconds to go, and I'd be grateful if you confine your remarks to the planning policies and the application rather than information that we don't have to hand and don't really need.
No, I'm sure that that'll be dealt with under another forum. Really, somebody else mentioned what was the reason that the sides were put on. It was indeed for animal welfare purposes. So the sides are on. If it had come forward as a prior notification, it would no doubt have been approved, and therefore the issue before you is simply, is it so significant that it warrants refusal now? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being so concise. We have two questions for you. Ian Howie first, and then David Slater.
Thank you, Chair. I believe you just covered that particular point regarding the purpose of these boards is for animal welfare. Is that correct?
Thank you. David Slater.
No, I haven't any question, no.
You're happy? Okay. Any other questions for Pauline Drysdale, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Am I able to ask yourself, Mr. Wolf, about the lighting? And Chair, could I ask if that's acceptable?
There's no lighting within the building.
So we cannot discuss the exterior lighting today, is that correct?
I'm not aware of any exterior lighting at the site. Oh, there are lights within the building, yes, and obviously the cladding will help shield the lighting. I don't think there's anything unusual about the lighting. Is there anything unusual about the lighting?
Sorry, say again.
Is there anything unusual about the lighting?
Nothing really. It's just for the livestock inside.
Yeah, the lighting is for within the building is for the livestock, which will be in there and for normal operational purposes.
And I take it they'll be shielded in the interest of the dark skies and light pollution.
The cladding around the building will help remove any light spill from the building.
Thank you. That satisfied, Pauline?
Yes, so we have it on record, your assurance of yourself and Mr. Maitland that the 36 lights on one side, and actually I think on all the other three sides, it's not that clear in the report, will be shielded so that the Dark Sky Park and UNESCO area is not affected. I'll take that as absolutely 100%, yes?
Oh, David will come in. David Sutty will come in.
Sorry, Councillor Drysdale, can I just confirm that when we say lights in the roof, it's roof lights, as in like Velux's, the transparency. It's not external lighting, that sort of light.
That's helpful, David. Thank you very much. It's just a matter of severe importance across agricultural buildings that do go up, and we often find that there are assurances made, and unfortunately it doesn't happen once the building's gone up, and then there's very little control over that, which is not acceptable within our communities. But thank you for clarifying that, David, and Mr. Wolf. Thanks.
Thank you, Pauline. I've got Councillor Barretti and then Councillor McFarlane. Andy, please. Tony, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just to let you know, prior to that, I'd lost vision of the conference room, and it's only just come on now, so I wasn't able to see any of the video. But I want to bring up the fact that Councillor Howie has already hinted, but has been brought up by the applicant, livestock. Are we talking extra livestock, or are we talking livestock being moved from the older buildings to the newer buildings? That would be one point. And just to clarify on previous councillor's remarks about the lighting, the main thing about dark skies lighting, it has to be under 3000 Kelvin and under a certain voltage or wattage. So that would be something that I think maybe the planning department should have looked at. Is that okay, Chair?
I think the only problem I've got is we don't interest ourselves in which livestock goes where. This is currently a farm building that is approved by the council. What it's used for will be a matter of decision for the applicant if it's granted, because we're not here to discuss the building itself. It has genuine, legitimate approval to be there. Can't be changed. We're only here to discuss the three sides that have been closed off, that in the original application were to be open aspects of or partial open aspects of construction. And for the lighting, I'm sure that's something planning officers will take into account if this, or will already have taken into account, but I'll get David to deal with the lighting element of it, but we're not here to discuss what the purpose of the shed is because it's up, it's approved, it's authorised. We're only here because there are 3 enclosed sides that, according to the original application, were to be open to the elements. David?
I'll accept that, Chair.
Sorry, just to confirm that really we would only be looking at external lighting in the instance that it was something that actually required permission if it was development, so real external lighting columns. Where you have a building that has artificial lighting in it or around it, then the dark skies guidance is something that would normally apply. But again, pare it back. This was a determination of prior approval for a permitted development. We wouldn't and couldn't condition anything about that. So I don't think it's really something which we should be getting too involved in with this one, simply for the
yeah,
reason
that's
that,
okay, Chair. I'll accept that, David.
Thanks very much, Tony. And I see Andy McFarlane withdrawing his questions. So if there are no other questions for the applicant and his agent, thank you very much, Mr. Wolf, for being here today, and thanks for responding to the questions, and thanks for your presentation. Members, we're in session. Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks very much, Chair. As I said before, DPAs are normally granted after 28 days, and this is the only reason it's here is for the 3 sides as opposed to anything else. I don't see any issues here with the 3 sides being granted because of what's happening when we think about avian flu and things like that. The animal welfare comes into it, and we need to get these animals into buildings where the 3 sides are actually up. The rest of the thing, the retrospective planning, is a different planning application, so therefore we're not talking about that particular issue. With that in mind, Chair, I say we go with the recommendation of the report.
Thanks, Councillor Dryborough. I did have a question from Councillor Dennerley, or he had a thought that he might want to put a proposal to committee. So given the discussion that he'll have heard already, do you have an alternative view to that presented by Councillor Dryborough? And he doesn't have a seconder yet, by the way.
Thank you, Chair. Having had the opportunity to listen to the facts, I still support the view of the Community Council and their proposal to defer the approval of the application to allow us the opportunity to make a more fuller and informed decision.
Well, the Community Council can't put a proposal here. It has to be a member, and it has to be either a refusal.
I support the proposal. I support that proposal.
What proposal?
Well, for the application to be deferred to allow us to review the environmental impact and to see in detail the concerns raised by the Community Council. That's what I'm stating and suggesting, that we go and look at that as put forward.
Okay, so basically Councillor Dennerley is asking for a site visit, and at that site visit we would look at the environmental impact.
Correct, yes.
That's fine. So I have a Councillor Carruthers looking to speak, and then I have Councillor Howie. And I will remind members, I will have, in fact, at this stage, Tracy, can you read out the section on requests for a site visit, please? There are very specific circumstances when a site visit can be asked for. It is so that every member that votes for a site visit cannot make a determination unless he or she sees the location themselves. But can you just read out the relevant paragraph, please?
Yes, Chair. They're actually found within the members' papers, so on page 3, before you get to the agenda. It specifies that a committee decision to undertake a site visit will cause delays and potential costs for applicants. There is also a significant cost to the council in undertaking a visit, for example, member and officer time, travel, etc. Whilst there may be good justification in certain cases for the committee to visit a site before determining an application, as a general rule, site visits should be undertaken very sparingly. Site visits should normally occur when an elected member of Dumfries and Galloway Council requests a site visit, giving clear and relevant reasons for doing so at the committee meeting, and the majority of the committee accept that they are unable to make a determination on the application without a site visit, or 2, that the Head of Economy and Development recommends that it is essential that the committee visit the site prior to determining the application, usually as the case is so complex and or strategic that it would not be prudent for the committee to determine the application without doing so first.
Thanks very much for that. That's helpful, Tracy, because the last site visit, Councillor Carruthers and I were the only two that attended a site visit in Stranraer, despite the majority of the members voting to attend. There were local members there. So I'm quite conscious that if members make a decision, a vote to attend a site visit, they cannot make a determination without being there. No to send me and Ian Carruthers or anybody else that wants or needs to go. So we have a proposal from a Councillor Dennerley for a site visit. I've got Councillor Carruthers, then Councillor Howie, and then Councillor Ian Blake. Councillor Carruthers, please. It seems that Councillor Carruthers has slipped off the radar, so I'll try again. I'll go to Ian Howie, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just willing to second Archie's proposal.
Thank you. So we've got a mover and a seconder with it.
Chair, as it's part of the process, obviously Councillor Dennerley's asked for a site visit. I think the thing would be, do we require a site visit or not? I believe that we don't need a site visit to determine the application today.
You're right, and that's my apologies for that. We have to decide first on the site visit. So we have Councillor Dennerley looking for a site visit, and I'm waiting for a seconder for him, and I've got Councillor Dryborough saying we do not need a site visit, and I'm waiting for a seconder from him. Ian Howie seconded Archie Dryborough, so I see Ivor Hislop's hand still up. Are you here to second Councillor Dennerley's motion of a site visit, Ivor?
No, it was on another point, but I'm happy to align myself with Councillor Driver and Councillor Howie.
Thank you, and I'll come to the other point when we determine this. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just double check? I must be having an off day today. Can I just double check that what you're saying is only those who attend the site visit can be involved in determining the application? Because I think I maybe misunderstood what you were saying there. That
David?
No, just to be clear on this, with the local review body there is that requirement, but it is not essential for members to attend a site visit to be able to determine it, provided that, for example, Councillor Campbell isn't here today, so he couldn't go on a site visit and then determine it. But all members who have heard the debate today will still be able to determine it, whether or not they go for a site visit in the event that that's the decision.
That's clarified that. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Councillor Blake, please.
Mine was exactly the same point, so I'll withdraw that, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So at the moment, Councillor Dennerley looking for a seconder for a site visit.
I'll second it, Chair, if you can hear me. Councillor Carruthers.
Councillor Carruthers, okay. So Councillor Dennerley, Councillor Dryborough and Councillor Howie, that will be the mover. Tracy, can you do the business, please?
Thanks, Chair. Motion proposed by Councillor Dryborough, seconded by Councillor Howie, to determine the application today without the need for a site visit, and the amendment proposed by Councillor Dennerley, seconded by Councillor Carruthers, is to defer consideration of this application to allow for a site visit to be undertaken. Proceed to the vote.
Okay.
Chairman?
Motion.
Vice Chair?
Motion.
Councillor Beretti.
Motion.
Councillor Blake.
Motion.
Councillor Crothers.
Amendment.
Councillor Dashper.
Motion.
Councillor Davis.
Motion.
Councillor Dennerley.
Amendment.
Councillor Dryborough.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale.
Amendment.
Councillor Hill.
Amendment.
Councillor Howie. Councillor Hislop.
Motion.
Councillor Jordan.
Motion.
Councillor McFarlane.
Motion.
Councillor Marshall.
Motion.
Councillor Slater.
Motion.
Councillor Thompson.
Motion.
Councillor Walters.
Motion.
And the motion carries 16 votes to 4. The application will be determined today without a site visit.
Thanks very much, Tracy. So I've got a motion from Councillor Dryborough, still on the table, seconded by Councillor Howie, that we go with officer's recommendation as set out in the papers. Are there any alternative? Oh, I did have Ian Blake and Ivor Hislop who wanted to raise different points. Do you still want to do that, Councillor Hislop?
Chair, it's just for clarity and process here. This is in front of us because a statutory objector has our statutory consultees put an objection in. That objection was late. Is there any timescales whereby an objection wouldn't be entertained if it was late?
I'll ask David, but I think we'll leave objections open-ended for community councils. But David will answer that accurately, no me.
Yes, we had some debate in the office about that one as well. Short answer is very often statutory consultees do take some time to come back to us. For example, SEPA, Historic Environment Scotland, and not strictly the 21 days that they're allowed. On that basis, that we would have accepted other key agency objections, we didn't feel we could decline to consider the Community Council objection, even although it was later than we would normally expect.
So if it runs over, if you've actually determined it, would you have accepted it then and brought it back because, well, it came in late? And, or, you know, in licensing terms, you would have a reason given by the person for being late, and you would determine whether you would accept it as a member at the licensing board or licensing panel. And it just, does that same process happen for yourselves, or once it's determined you've missed your chance?
David?
Yes, once a decision has actually been issued, then any late representations are basically, you can't consider them because the determination has already been made. There is just to be clear, there is a strict cut-off for members of the public, and indeed there's a strict cut-off for members to call things in. So there was some debate as to whether or not to entertain this, but given that there was still time to put it on this particular agenda, then it was considered prudent to do so.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ivor. Councillor Blake, did you want to come back with something?
No, mine was only on the requirement to attend a site visit to take part in the determination. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ian. And Stephen, you're all right, because your name's up here. You don't want to speak.
I think I'd raised the point, and then Councillor Blake was in concurrence, so it's academic now.
Thank you. Okay. So we have a proposer and a seconder that members go with the officer's recommendation. Do we have alternative view from anyone? In that case, the application is approved as set out in the papers. Tracy, can you just confirm the decision, please?
Members have approved the application unconditionally. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, I have no other business today. Thank you very much for your attendance. Nice to be brief for a wee change. Thank you. Thanks, members.